"Back off, old man, or you're next." That's what one of them said right before they stunned my wife with a taser. Their weapons turned toward me next. I didn't shout. I didn't flee. I simply locked eyes with their leader and spoke 5 words. "Contact General Rourke, immediately." That's when the SWAT officers froze. If 5 words can halt elite men mid-action, type respect for those who never stop standing guard. The threat crackled in the air like a storm about to break. The scent of sweat, gunpowder, and adrenaline choked the room. Dust floated in beams of light slicing through the shattered window. The soldier's hand hovered over his holster, knuckles white. But the old man didn't flinch. He stood as if rooted to the earth itself, chest rising with steady defiance, eyes locked on the young man who thought violence could command respect. His name was Elias, 74. Wrinkles mapped the wars he'd lived through, the ones fought on battlefields, and the ones that tore through kitchens and living rooms. But nothing in his past could prepare him for this. His grandson, Tyler, face hidden beneath a black bandana, stood inches away, pointing a pistol at a woman barely old enough to vote. Tyler didn't recognize the man blocking his path. Or maybe he did and chose not to care. After all, it was loyalty. To the crew now, not blood. The girl whimpered behind Elias, her dress torn, her knees scraped from being dragged across concrete. She clung to Elias's coat like it was the last solid thing in her collapsing world. Elias's voice didn't tremble. "Let her go," Tyler sneered, his voice soaked in mockery. "You don't get it. She saw everything. She's a child. She's a witness." They stood like statues, 2 generations at war, one fighting for control, the other for redemption. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, too far to matter. Inside, time had frozen around the decision of a single man. Elias had seen this coming. The late-night whispers, the quick cash, the new tattoo inked in darkness across Tyler's neck. But no lecture had broken through the armor of pain and resentment that wrapped the boy's soul. Tyler believed the streets had given him power, but Elias knew better. They had only numbed him. "Tyler," he said, more gently now, "please. This isn't who you are." The barrel shifted slightly. Doubt. Barely visible, but there. "She's nobody," Tyler insisted, less certain now. "She got in the way. She's someone's daughter, just like you're my grandson." That landed. Tyler blinked. For a second, his grip faltered. Elias stepped forward, slow and deliberate, not as a threat, as a grandfather. "You don't have to do this. It's not too late to come back." The girl sobbed behind him. Tyler's eyes flicked to her, then back to Elias. The room seemed to hold its breath. "You weren't there," Tyler growled. "When Mom died, you ran. I stayed alive. That was the only thing I knew how to do. I didn't know how to raise a boy alone." Tyler flinched, like the truth hit harder than a fist. Elias took another step. "I failed you, but don't fail her. Not like I failed you." Outside, a car screeched around the corner. The sirens were closer now, echoing off alley walls. The crew had already scattered. Tyler was on his own, him and the choice in his hands. The old man reached for the gun, not with force, but with faith. Tyler's hand shook. His chest heaved. His finger twitched near the trigger. Then, the gun clattered to the floor. Elias caught it before it hit the ground. The girl collapsed in tears, and Tyler didn't run. He didn't speak. He just dropped to his knees and stared at the floor like he'd woken from a nightmare he hadn't known he was dreaming. Elias crouched beside him, resting a calloused hand on his shoulder. There were no more words, only the hum of sirens growing, louder, and the weight of a future that hadn't yet been written. The silence that followed was heavier than the chaos that had come before. Tyler remained on his knees, motionless, his breath ragged, as if each inhale was a confession. The girl behind Elias had stopped crying, though her body still trembled, with the memory of what almost happened. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. The sound of the approaching sirens carried the weight of a judgment they all felt in their bones. Time resumed its course. In the span of minutes, flashing red, and blue lights painted the cracked walls of the warehouse. the stench of rusted metal, blood, and oil mixed with the cold night air pouring in through the broken windows. Armed officers flooded the building, yelling commands, their boots pounding the concrete like war drums. Guns were drawn, fingers ready. But Elias stood calmly, both hands in the air, the weapon at his feet. Tyler never moved. The girl raised her hands too, silently pleading with her eyes. One of the officers recognized her, the mayor's niece, reported missing for days. That changed everything. In a matter of seconds, the aggressive tension shifted. Guns lowered. Officers rushed to the girl, wrapping her in a blanket, guiding her to safety. The rest turned their attention to Tyler. Elias stepped back, letting them do what had to be done. He didn't argue. He didn't intervene. The consequences had arrived, and they were cold and precise. 2 officers handcuffed the boy without resistance. Tyler looked at no one. He seemed lost in a fog, his gaze stuck to the floor where the gun had fallen. Outside, the girl was escorted to an ambulance, her legs barely able to carry her weight. Elias followed her with his eyes. She would live. That was enough for now. One officer, older than the others, approached Elias. There was something in his posture that suggested recognition, not of Elias the man, but Elias the relic. He'd seen men like him before, the ones who bore more guilt than they spoke and had survived more losses than they cared to count. "You all right?" the officer asked. Elias nodded once. "What happened in there?" "A mistake," he replied. "Almost a tragedy." The officer glanced toward the squad car where Tyler sat, head lowered, hands cuffed in front of him. No struggle, no rebellion, just silence. The report would be filed, interviews conducted, but the core of it was already known. A gang kidnapping gone wrong, a young girl taken as leverage, and a grandfather who'd stepped into a bullet's path without blinking. But what the paper wouldn't say was everything in between. The heartbreak, the regret, the years of silence between Elias and Tyler that had led to this exact moment. At the hospital, the girl's parents arrived, rushing past reporters and cameras. The embrace was immediate and unbreakable. Gratitude was expressed between sobs. Elias stood off to the side, not expecting thanks, not needing it. He wasn't the hero. He was just the last line that hadn't been crossed, until now. Back. At the precinct, Tyler sat alone in the holding room. The steel walls and harsh lighting gave no comfort. He hadn't spoken since the arrest. The officers didn't push. Sometimes silence told more than words ever could. Elias was given the option to press charges, to testify, to distance himself from the boy whose choices had nearly ended a life. But he declined. "I'll speak when it matters," he said. Not in a courtroom. Somewhere real. The system would still move. Laws would be followed. But Elias wasn't after punishment. He wanted transformation. And that couldn't be forced with prison bars. That night, Elias returned home. The house hadn't changed, but something inside him had. For the first time in years, he turned on the porch light and left the front door unlocked. He sat in the kitchen, a cold cup of coffee in his hands, and stared at the photograph of his daughter, Tyler's mother, on the wall. She had the same eyes. He didn't cry. He just waited. For what? He didn't know. Maybe for morning. Maybe for a second chance. The morning sun crept in slowly, casting long streaks of gold across the living room floor. Elias hadn't moved from his seat. The coffee was still untouched, now bitter and cold. He had spent the night in silence, not out of exhaustion, but out of necessity. Something about the stillness kept his thoughts from unraveling completely. He had seen many things in his life: war, death, heartbreak, but nothing like the moment Tyler had raised that gun. Not at the girl, at himself. That detail haunted him the most. Elias didn't tell the police everything. Some truths weren't for paper or prosecution. They were scars meant to be carried in silence. Tyler hadn't kidnapped the girl. Not exactly. He had stumbled into the situation by accident, looking for a place to hide, to escape from the consequences of something else entirely. He was already in too deep, and the gang had used him as leverage. One misstep, and the girl was dragged into a nightmare. The boy hadn't planned it, but he hadn't stopped it either. That was the difference. And it was enough to break what little trust still lingered between them. Elias stood and stretched, his joints cracking in protest. He walked to the door, still open from the night before. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from everyone knowing something had happened, but no one wanting to be the first to speak it aloud. Stepped outside, letting the morning air clear the heaviness in his chest. Across the street, Mrs. Delgado peeked out from behind her curtain. Her eyes met his. A nod passed between them, not of greeting, but of understanding. People talked, of course. They always did. But for once, Elias didn't care. The day moved, slowly. Elias tried to distract himself, fixing a leaky faucet, organizing his tools in the shed, feeding the neighbor's cat who always found a way into his yard. But none of it worked. Everything reminded him of Tyler. The way the boy used to follow him around as a child, mimicking every move. The way he used to believe Elias could fix anything. And then he remembered the moment it all started to unravel. It had been subtle. Tyler's mother died young, too young. Cancer didn't wait. And Elias, broken from losing his only daughter, had failed to bridge the grief that settled between them. Tyler had become a stranger inside the house that once felt safe. Years passed with half-spoken words and unresolved guilt. Elias buried himself in routine. Tyler buried himself in rage. Now, the result of that silence sat behind bars. Late that afternoon. The phone rang. It wasn't the police. It was the social worker. A woman named Doreen, her voice calm, measured. She asked if Elias would come to the youth detention center. Not as a witness, not as a relative. As something else entirely. He asked for you, she said. Elias didn't answer right away. He stared out the window at the old oak tree where Tyler used to play. His hands, once so capable, felt clumsy as they gripped the phone. "I'll be there in an hour," he said, and hung up. The drive was short, but it felt endless. Elias's mind replayed every memory, every missed opportunity, every harsh word, every time he should have held the boy and didn't. When he arrived, the guard at the entrance didn't ask questions. Doreen was waiting for him inside, clipboard in hand, eyes kind but firm. "He's confused, angry. But he's not unreachable," she said. Elias nodded, more to himself than to her. They led him down a sterile hallway, white walls, buzzing lights, the faint echo of distant doors clanging. Shut. Tyler sat in a small room, hunched forward, hands clasped tightly. He looked up as Elias entered, but didn't speak. His face was tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of everything he'd done. Elias sat across from him, no table. Between them, just air. Thick, awkward, and loaded with history. "I'm not here to judge," Elias said quietly. "I'm here because I didn't come sooner." Tyler's lips parted slightly, like he might say something. But the words didn't. "Come! Not yet!" And that was fine. Sometimes presence was louder than speech. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was dense, built from years of unspoken truths and wounds never acknowledged. Tyler wouldn't look at him, but Elias didn't expect him to. Earning trust, especially one that had been abandoned for so long, wasn't something that happened in a single visit. It took time, and Elias had already wasted too much of it. The room felt colder than it should have, the kind of cold that didn't come from temperature, but from the weight of guilt lingering in the air. Tyler had changed. He looked thinner, older somehow. like life had aged him rapidly in the span of a few weeks. The boy who once ran through sprinklers in the summer now sat shackled by regret. Elias noticed the small tremor in Tyler's hands, a detail most would have missed, but not him. That subtle shake said more than any confession could. This wasn't a hardened criminal. This was a broken soul pretending to be strong because the world had given him no other choice. He didn't push for conversation. Instead, he offered something else, presence. A kind of quiet that said, "I'm here now, even if I wasn't before." The visit ended with a nod. No hugs, no promises, just a nod. But it was more than enough for a beginning. Back home, Elias stared at the old photo hanging near the stairs. It was from a long-forgotten summer. Tyler, maybe 8 years old, smiling with missing teeth, arms wrapped around a dog they no longer had. Behind them, Elias stood with grease on his shirt and a rare grin. That day had felt like any other back. Then, but now, it was a reminder of everything that could have been salvaged, had he only noticed the signs. He poured himself a drink, but didn't take a sip. The weight of memory was sobering enough. The next few days passed in slow motion. Elias returned to the detention center twice. Each time, Tyler spoke a little more. Not about what happened, he wasn't ready for that, but about small things. What books he was reading, how the food was unbearable, how he missed the sound of rain hitting the roof of Elias's house. It was a start. On the third visit, something shifted. Tyler mentioned her, the girl, not by name, just her. She didn't scream, he said suddenly, eyes fixed on the floor. Even when they tied her up, she just looked at me, like I was the worst kind of coward. Elias didn't interrupt. I didn't want it to happen, but I didn't stop it either. And that's the same thing, isn't it? There it was, the weight, the truth, the confession buried beneath layers of denial. She trusted me, Tyler whispered. For a second, I think she really thought I'd help her. Elias felt his chest tighten. No answer he could give would erase what had been done. But maybe, just maybe, he could help steer the rest of Tyler's life in a different direction. You still can, he said. Not fix it, but face it, own it. Tyler didn't nod. He didn't speak, but the tears that finally fell said everything. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He paced the hallway, fingers brushing the edges of old furniture, memories tucked into every corner. He thought of Tyler's words, the shame, the brokenness, but also the spark of remorse. That mattered. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Legal, paperwork, juvenile justice forms, visitation schedules. But beneath those, something else. A letter. One he had started years ago but never sent. It was addressed to Tyler. Half-written apologies, scattered thoughts, a failed attempt at reconnection. He read it now, aloud to the quiet house. It felt strange, speaking to someone who wasn't there, but somehow it also felt necessary. At sunrise, he walked to the mailbox, not to send the letter, just to feel the cold metal, to imagine a version of himself that had sent it years earlier, a version who didn't let silence win. Later that day, Doreen called. "There's going to be a hearing," she said. "The court wants to know if there's someone who can speak on his behalf." She didn't need to finish the question. Elias already knew the answer. "I'll be there," he replied. And for the first time in a long while, he meant it with every part of his being. The courthouse stood like a monument to all the things people wished they could undo. Its cold marble walls, its echoing halls. It wasn't a place built for forgiveness. It was built to hold judgment. Elias stepped through the doors, feeling like every step was heavier than the last. Not because of the place, but because of what it represented. A crossroads in a life already veering off course. Tyler sat at the far end of the hearing room, his wrists bound in cuffs, eyes lowered. He wasn't the same boy Elias remembered from old photographs or hazy summer memories. That version had vanished somewhere along the years, swallowed by silence, by mistakes, by everything Elias hadn't been around to stop. The judge glanced through the case file with mechanical precision. To him, Tyler was another name in a stack of troubled youths. But to Elias, he was still a son, even if the word felt broken. He listened to the social worker's report. It was clinical, detached. A rundown of Tyler's background, his poor school attendance, his behavioral issues, the escalation that led to the crime. Everything factual, nothing human. It stripped Tyler down to statistics and past failures. When asked to speak, Elias hesitated. Not because he didn't have words, but because for once, they needed to come from the part of him that had failed the most. He spoke about absence, not just physical but emotional, about how life had taught him to hide from pain instead of facing it, how he believed for years that providing financially was enough, until he realized his silence had taught Tyler everything he never meant to. He didn't ask for mercy. He asked for a chance, for Tyler to be held accountable, yes, but also to be seen for more than one moment of failure. Afterward, Tyler was led away. He didn't speak. He didn't glance back. That night, the house felt smaller, not from walls closing in, but from the awareness of everything left unsaid. Elias walked room to room, brushing his hand over forgotten objects. A baseball glove still dusty from the last time Tyler used it, a guitar missing a string, photos tucked behind magnets on the fridge, ghosts of the boy he couldn't save from, becoming someone else. The hearing didn't resolve anything immediately. The decision would come later. Until then, all Elias could do was wait and hope. The waiting became a ritual. Every morning he'd sit on the porch with a coffee, eyes scanning the horizon like it might deliver news. The town moved on as usual. People went to work, kids biked down the street. But for Elias, time was suspended. He started writing again, not for anyone, just for himself. Pages filled with things he wished he'd said to Tyler. Not advice, just truth. He wrote about fear, about regret, about how it's easier to run from pain than to face the shame of watching someone you love fall. Sometimes he wondered if Tyler was doing the same, facing his past in some small way behind those walls. One afternoon, he received a letter. It was short, the handwriting jagged and unsure. Not an apology, not a confession, just 4 words. I'm still your son. Elias didn't cry, but something in him loosened. He pinned the note to the refrigerator beside the old photos. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the story wasn't over. That even broken things could hold meaning. Weeks later, the verdict came. Rehabilitation over incarceration. Tyler would remain in custody, but in a center focused on reform, therapy, and education. The court recognized remorse. They also recognized Elias's testimony. It wasn't absolution, but it was a beginning. Elias visited him a week later. The setting was different. Less bars, more open spaces. There were books on shelves, a garden outside, even laughter in the distance. Hope lived here, not in abundance, but enough to survive. Tyler sat beneath a tree, staring at a sketch pad. He didn't look up when Elias approached, but he didn't move away either. Elias sat down on the bench beside him, careful not to speak. He simply watched as Tyler drew shapes that made little sense, but carried meaning all the same. There was no need for words. The silence this time didn't feel heavy. It felt like something new, something possible. The drive back from the center was quiet, not because Elias had nothing to say, but because the silence between visits had become part of the ritual. It was no longer a void, it was space to breathe. He'd grown to understand that not every moment demanded words, especially with Tyler. There were things still too raw to say out loud, things better carried than spoken. He spent the days following the visit trying to re-establish a life that didn't revolve around guilt. There were still bills to pay, still routines to maintain. But now, everything had a layer of purpose. He'd begun volunteering at a youth center downtown, working with kids who reminded him of Tyler, not because they were lost, but because they were still reachable. Each story carried echoes of decisions that might have been different if someone had just stayed. One of the teens, a boy named Ramon, always wore a hoodie too big for him and never looked anyone in the eye. Elias saw in him the early signs: withdrawal, anger masked as disinterest, potential slowly corroding under neglect. But unlike before, Elias didn't step back. He leaned in. He started with simple things, bringing extra snacks, asking about music, letting Ramon teach him how to play a video game he didn't understand. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about being present. Something Elias had learned the hard way was far more powerful than he'd imagined. Letters from Tyler began arriving more often. Some were only a few lines. Others filled pages. They spoke of art projects he was working on, books he was reading, memories from childhood that surfaced out of nowhere. The writing wasn't polished, but it had heart. Elias read them at night, sometimes out loud, sometimes in silence, letting each word settle like a drop in a dry well. In one letter, Tyler asked about his mother. He hadn't mentioned her in years. Elias stared at the sentence for a long time. Then, he took out an old photo from a box in the attic, one of the few that had survived the divorce, and sent it back with his reply. No explanation, just a memory. The past, he realized, didn't have to be rewritten. It just had to be acknowledged. He also began rebuilding his own connections. He reached out to his sister, whom he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade after. A family fallout. The call was awkward at first, filled with long pauses and stammered attempts at small talk. But they laughed eventually about their childhood, about their father's terrible cooking, and the time they tried to run away with a wagon full of peanut butter and crackers. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was movement, and that was enough. The seasons began to shift. Leaves turned to embers and drifted to the ground. The town's quiet rhythm continued, but Elias noticed more. He started walking in the mornings again. He greeted neighbors by name. He repainted the front, porch. Small things, yes, but each action stitched him back into the world. When the center allowed in-person family group sessions, Elias signed up without hesitation. He wasn't sure what to expect. He just knew that showing up mattered. The room was filled with nervous energy and plastic chairs. Other families fidgeted, unsure of how much to say or how to say it. Tyler walked in, taller than before, shoulders broader, face more focused. He sat beside Elias without hesitation. No words were exchanged. They just listened as others shared stories of breakdowns, breakthroughs, betrayal, and forgiveness. The rawness in the room felt familiar. It was the shared language of those who'd learned that love, in its truest form, is forged in the fires of pain. When it was Elias's turn to speak, he didn't try to sound wise or composed. He just said what was true, that healing wasn't a straight line, that some days still felt like failures, but also that this, sitting next to his son, both of them trying, that was a victory. After the session, they walked outside together. The evening was cool, the sky turning violet above them. Tyler didn't say much, just looked up and muttered, "Thanks for not giving up." Elias smiled. "I already did once. I'm not doing it again." No dramatic embrace followed, no tearful reconciliation, just two people walking side by side, still broken in places, but whole enough to keep going. Winter crept in slowly, blanketing the town in silence. Elias welcomed the cold. It kept him sharp, reminded him that change wasn't always comfortable. At the center, the sessions had grown more personal. Tyler began opening up, not with long stories or emotional confessions, but with subtle shifts. He laughed more, made eye contact, participated without being pushed. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about recovering the person he might have been. Elias noticed the details others might miss. The way Tyler helped another boy find his workbook without being asked. The way he paused before reacting, like he'd started weighing the weight of his words. These things, though small, mattered. They were signs of a mind reassembling itself after chaos. One afternoon, Elias arrived early to the group meeting and was asked to sit in on a creative therapy class. He didn't expect much. A few kids scribbling into notebooks or pretending to care. But the instructor, a woman named Zoe, had a presence that shifted the air in the room. She didn't lecture. She challenged. She invited the teens to write. Not about their crimes or regrets, but about their names. What they meant, where they came from, who they could become. Tyler didn't write much, but he stayed. He listened. And when Zoe read one of her own poems aloud, a piece about her brother's addiction and her silent anger, Elias watched Tyler's hand tighten into a fist, then relax. Something in him recognized the truth in her words. That was enough. Zoe approached Elias after class. Her voice was calm but firm. Your son's carrying more than what he's told you. Let him write it out. Don't push. Just give him the space. Elias nodded. He hadn't known how to help Tyler speak, but maybe words weren't always meant to be spoken. That night, he left a journal on Tyler's bed with a note inside. No rules, no deadlines, just you. 2 weeks passed before Tyler mentioned it. I've been writing. It's not good. Elias shrugged. Doesn't have to be. He never asked to read it. That wasn't the point. Meanwhile, Ramon, the teen from the youth center, had gone missing for 3 days. No calls, no signs. Elias feared the worst. But on the 4th night, just after the center closed, Ramon showed up. Hoodie soaked, eyes red, hands shaking. He didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway. Elias didn't ask where he'd been. He offered food, dry clothes, and silence. Later, while sweeping the floor, Elias found a crumpled piece of paper in the trash. On it, scribbled in thick pencil, was a single line. Don't let me vanish like him. It hit hard. Elias knew who him meant. And it wasn't Ramon's father. It was every man who had walked away, disappeared, stopped showing up, Elias. Folded the paper and kept it. Not to confront Ramon with it, but to remember the responsibility he carried now, to be a man who stayed. The holidays approached. Lights went up around town. Families reunited. At the center, there were no celebrations, but the staff organized a simple dinner. Tyler didn't want to go at first. Too many people, too much noise. But Zoe convinced him. The room was filled, with mismatched decorations and folding tables, but there was warmth, laughter. Plates passed around. No one asked for stories. No one brought up charges or sentences. Just music and food and fragile peace. Elias stood by the door, watching Tyler. Joke with another boy? His guard lowered. For the first time, Elias saw the teenager behind the trauma. Not the inmate, not the lost child. Just a boy trying to breathe. Zoe stepped beside him. You did good, she said. He shook his head. I almost lost him. But you didn't. That night driving home, Elias felt the ache of something returning. Not happiness. That was still too far. But hope. Real, grounded hope. Settling back into the spaces grief had hollowed out. Back at home, the porch lights flickered in the wind. Inside, Elias sat at the kitchen table, pulled out the crumpled note Ramon had written, and placed it beside Tyler's latest letter. Two lives, different paths, but connected by the same thread. Someone chose to stay, and staying, he'd learned, was the hardest part. Spring didn't arrive with blossoms or fanfare. It came slowly, like healing, like trust. The frost melted away without notice, and the wind stopped biting quite so hard. In the quiet of change, Elias began to understand that some transformations happened without ceremony, silent, patient, steady. The center had grown quieter, too. Tyler's time there was nearing its end. The court had agreed to a reevaluation. Months of progress, consistent reports, and Elias's persistent advocacy had finally tipped the scales. Still, Elias didn't allow himself to celebrate too soon. Paperwork was one thing, reintegration was another. He watched his son move through the halls like someone unlearning old shadows. Tyler no longer flinched when someone raised their voice. He didn't retreat when spoken to. There was a sturdiness to him now, not confidence, not yet, but a fragile sense of control. That alone was victory. On his final week, Zoe invited each teen to leave behind a single page, a message, a poem, a drawing, something for the next group. Tyler left his journal page blank until the very last minute. Then, in small, careful writing, he penned only this: "I stayed. So can you." Elias didn't ask to read it. He only saw the copy pinned to the wall weeks later, long after Tyler had gone. He stood before it for a long time, hands in his pockets, reading that single line over and over. On the day of Tyler's release, the morning was clear and cold. They didn't speak much on the drive. There was too much to say, and neither knew where to begin. Instead, they let silence carry them across familiar roads. Home wasn't what Tyler remembered. It had been repainted, rearranged, softened. Elias had made small changes without realizing he was preparing for this moment. The guest room had been converted into a study, but his son's room remained the same, almost. The bed was new. The door now opened without a creak. On the desk, the same journal, waiting. The first days were uneven. Tyler struggled with too much space, too much quiet. He walked the house at night, pacing. Elias didn't interfere. He stayed visible, accessible, a calm presence in the storm of reintegration. Sometimes Tyler sat on the porch steps, hoodie up, hands tucked into his sleeves, watching the world pass like he was still behind glass. Other times, he helped Elias fix the shed or sweep the garage, movements slow and deliberate, like they were learning to share space again. Then came the letter. It arrived mid-week with no return address. A short, careful message from Ramon. "Still here. Still trying. Thanks." Elias read it twice before handing it to Tyler. The boy's expression didn't change, but he folded the note with a care that said everything. By summer, Tyler had begun classes online. He didn't call them school, he called them tests. Quietly, without fanfare, he passed them all. He also started volunteering. Nothing big, just helping at a food bank on weekends, stacking boxes, sorting cans. Elias drove him there and, back without questions, let the routine become normal. One evening, while cleaning out the attic, they found an old photo album. Elias opened it without thinking, and there they were. Images of a younger Tyler, face unguarded, eyes wide. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Tyler took the album, held it for a moment, then placed it back in the box. That night, Elias found a note on the kitchen table. 5 words, written in the same hand that once refused to hold a pen. "I'm still here, thank you." Years later, the center would hang a framed version of Tyler's line on the main wall. It became a mantra. For every kid who came through, those 5 words mattered more than lectures or punishments. I stayed. So can you. And somewhere across town, In a modest house with creaky floors and sun-faded walls, Elias sat on the porch, coffee in hand, watching his son walk across the street, steady, taller, changed. He didn't need to say anything. He had stayed, and Tyler had stayed too. And in the quiet space between what was broken and what was healed, that was enough.